We see it every time we walk through a British city: streets that feel tight, buildings close together, homes, shops, pubs, offices, parks, and stations all stitched into a space that feels human-scaled. But British cities are dense and walkable for a reason most people never notice, and once you understand it, the entire country starts to make sense. Most people assume British cities are dense and walkable simply because they're old, built before cars, built before modern planning, built when people had no choice but to walk. That explanation sounds right. It feels intuitive, but it doesn't go far enough, because many places are old. Many cities existed long before cars, yet British cities developed a very specific kind of density, one that survived industrialization, survived cars, survived modern planning, and still shapes daily life today. That persistence is not accidental. To understand it, you have to start with something Britain never escaped: constraint. Britain is a small island with a large population, limited land, and a long history of centralized power. Unlike countries that expanded endlessly outward, Britain encountered limits early: physical, political, and legal. Land was scarce long before modern capitalism. It was controlled by the crown, the church, aristocrats, and later private landlords. It was measured, taxed, inherited, and fiercely protected. When land is scarce and controlled, you don't spread out, you compress. Early British towns formed around necessity: rivers for water and trade, hills for defense, crossroads for commerce, walls for survival. Everything clustered tightly because distance wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Outside the walls was uncertainty, inside was safety. Density wasn't a preference, it was protection. Medieval streets grew narrow not because planners liked them that way, but because space inside the walls was precious. Buildings leaned toward each other, upper floors extended outward. Streets became shaded corridors, reducing wind and retaining heat. Even fire risk didn't reverse this pattern. After major fires, rebuilding still prioritized compactness because land values and defensive logic never disappeared. This created a deeply ingrained spatial habit: build close, share walls, minimize wasted space. That habit didn't vanish when the walls came down, it became cultural memory. Then came the Industrial Revolution. Britain industrialized faster than any society in history. Millions moved from rural areas into cities in a matter of decades. Demand for housing exploded overnight. But again, land did not expand. Factories needed workers nearby. Workers needed shelter near factories. Speed mattered, cost mattered, efficiency mattered. This is where terrace housing emerged at scale: rows of identical homes, built wall to wall, sharing structure, heat, and infrastructure. Narrow streets, short distances, minimal ornamentation. These weren't designed to be charming. They were designed to exist. But density created something unexpected, because people lived close together. Services clustered, shops opened nearby, schools followed children, pubs appeared where workers gathered, churches anchored neighborhoods. Everything moved closer because proximity meant survival. Walkability wasn't planned, it emerged organically from pressure. Then came the railways. This moment locked Britain's urban form into place. Railways didn't just move people, they fixed cities in space. Stations became gravitational centers. Businesses, housing, hotels, and markets clustered around them. Cities expanded, but not evenly. They grew outward along rail lines, forming dense nodes rather than endless sprawl. This mattered, because when growth follows transit, density remains high. Walking stays practical, centers stay alive. British cities didn't grow around cars because cars didn't exist yet. They grew around feet and trains, and that pattern proved stubborn. Then cars arrived, and this is where history could have split. Britain could have demolished and rebuilt. It could have widened streets, separated uses, flattened neighborhoods, and redesigned cities for vehicles. Technically, it was possible, but practically, it wasn't. Land was too expensive, cities were too old, ownership too fragmented, political resistance too strong, cultural attachment too deep. And like newer countries, Britain couldn't easily erase its past. So instead of reshaping cities for cars, Britain adapted cars to cities. Roads remained narrow, parking stayed limited, driving stayed inconvenient in dense areas. Public transport remained essential rather than optional. Cars existed, but they were constrained, and constraints shape behavior. When driving is inconvenient, people walk. When walking is normal, density stays viable. When density stays viable, local life survives. Planning laws reinforce this path. Green belts restricted outward expansion, forcing development inward. Town boundaries were preserved, agricultural land was protected. Cities were contained rather than allowed to dissolve outward. This wasn't romanticism, it was control. British planning culture viewed and checked sprawl as waste of land, infrastructure, and identity. Growth was allowed, but only under pressure. That pressure maintained density. And density does something profound. It makes walking efficient. It makes transit viable. It makes street social. When everything is close, life spills into public space. Shops rely on foot traffic. Streets feel occupied. Places feel known. This creates feedback. Walkable places attract activity. Activity sustains services. Services reinforce proximity. The city becomes self-supporting. Contrast this with places that expanded outward without limits. Low density makes walking inefficient. Inefficient walking discourages street life. Reduced street life encourages driving. Driving demands space. Space pushes everything farther apart. That cycle never fully took hold in Britain, not because British planners were uniquely wise, but because British constraints were unavoidable. Scarce land, old cities, legal barriers, cultural resistance to erasure. These forces preserved density long enough for its benefits to become obvious. By the time cars dominated globally, Britain had already locked in a different urban logic. Today, people praise British cities for charm, liveliness, and walkability, but these qualities are side effects, not intentions. They are the result of centuries of adaptation under pressure. Even modern development reflects this legacy. New housing is dense by default. Mixed-use buildings are common. Transit-oriented development is expected. Cars are accommodated, but rarely prioritized. The city remains built first for people, second for movement, and only third for machines. This affects everything. Health outcomes improve when walking is normal. Social interaction increases when streets are active. Energy use drops when distances are short. Local economies strengthen when money circulates nearby. British cities feel different because they function differently, not because they're old, not because they're quaint, but because they were shaped by scarcity, continuity, and restraint. And once you understand that, you start noticing it everywhere. The narrow streets that slow cars, the corner shops that survive without parking, the train stations at the heart of cities, the neighborhoods where daily life fits within minutes. You realize British cities weren't designed to be walkable. They were forced to be. And that pressure created one of the most resilient urban forms in the modern world. Once you notice it, you can't unsee it. And every walk through a British city stops feeling like chance and starts feeling like design.